Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Fanitarium. We had originally planned to have a series of underappreciated live-action Disney movies for you, and though we have recorded some of those episodes, that series has been delayed to August when I have a baby due. Never fear, though, we have a lot of content planned for this summer, and if you are a fan of big giant robots and mecha shows and books, I think you're going to enjoy it. The theme for this summer is, well, mecha robots. We have composers, voice actors, authors, and so on, all in that genre that are going to be discussing them with you this summer. So if you're a fan of those, you're going to enjoy what's coming up. And if you're just a fan of our interviews with composers, authors, and voice actors, I think you're going to enjoy our content for this summer, starting right now.
The title of listener bestowed upon our beloved audience is one especially applicable today as we prepare for the arrival of our latest guest. For as the vaulted ceilings of the Fanitarium began to ring with tones most melodious, our seers knew it would be a composer that graced our presence today. That composer? Mr. Jon Everist, known for contributing his harmonious arrangements to the world of video games. In recent years, his work in Shadowrun Hong Kong showcased his impressively eclectic style, garnering well-deserved praise for its artistic excellence. And his latest release, Battletech, has been called inspired and beautiful. And throughout his career, he has worked to marry the electronic to the orchestral to the cinematic. It is thanks to Mr. Everist and those like him that the world of video games and our collective experience of it is all the richer for their music. And it is our distinct honor to be granted the gift of our esteemed guest's company and conversation. So welcome, Mr. Everist, to the Fanitarium.
And with that intro, welcome to the show, Mr. Jon Everist.
Hello, hello.
So, I personally love interviewing composers. I think the first one I ever did was years ago was Sam Hulick, and since then I've gone through a lot, and this is some of my favorite interviews to do because you guys are always so open and so awesome to talk to. You guys have a lot of different ideas than I usually hear from a lot of people. Probably because you guys use different resources and you don't have unlimited budgets. But welcome. I love to talk to you guys.
Well, yeah, it's awesome to be here, and I hope I don't disappoint you.
You won't. You will not. I've been listening to your music for a while now, but deep diving all week, so it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome, appreciate it.
So, one thing I just want to start with, you started, at least most people, your first official release game-wise was Necropolis, I believe. And then you dived into Shadowrun, or at least two of the entries of Shadowrun, since there's a lot more Shadowrun than most people realize. So what got you officially started? Well, I'm assuming you had more works before then that you worked on that we just don't know about, that aren't posted on Mobi and IMDb and other sources.
Well, yeah, so the first project I actually worked on was Shadowrun Returns, but I only did a trailer for that. So I was actually still back in school at DigiPen, and I got an call from Mitch Gittleman at the time, who was studio head of Harebrained Schemes, and they needed a trailer piece for the Shadowrun Returns, which had just had its successful Kickstarter. So that was really the first one that I did, and I was still in school. And then from that, the Shadowrun Dragonfall came after that, and I basically added several tracks to an existing soundtrack that they had already had. And then from there, pretty much, they asked me back to do Shadowrun Hong Kong as the one and only composer on that, and shortly after that was Necropolis.
Oh, okay. Nice. So you were studying in school, you said at that time. What sort of instruction did they give you to start working on your very first trailer, and how nervous were you to start working on a game trailer that people would actually watch and see, and hopefully in massive numbers, being a Kickstarter for video games?
Yeah, it was really exciting. I mean, so Shadowrun in particular was one of the first Super Nintendo games that I remember playing that was sort of like had adult themes involved. I was pretty young at the time. So it was really kind of an amazing experience for me as a person who had kind of changed directions midway in life and decided to pursue composition music full time rather than just doing it sort of as a hobby, or touring and producing music for bands and stuff, which I'd done for most of my childhood and adult life. So it was an interesting experience. I sort of gambled it all and went back to school to DigiPen to study music and sound design for video games. And the instruction there was great. I mean, I was able to do the traditional composition theory classes and stuff with a very influential person to me, Bruce Stark, who is a great jazz pianist and composer, Juilliard alumni. And it sort of unlocked a side of music in general and composition in particular that got me super excited, and then being able to really have my first gig be a project that I had grown up playing was kind of surreal, and then being able to build off that and continuing the relationship with Harebrained Schemes was just a super lucky sort of break for me,
Especially since nowadays, I honestly, I think since LucasArts closed, I've never actually interviewed a composer who is kind of exclusive to a studio, like an actual studio composer. They're almost all independent now. The only one I can think of is maybe Russell at Blizzard might be.
Yeah, I think he's full time still with Blizzard. Yeah, but I'm still freelance, so
yeah, I think most of you guys have gone freelance since that's honestly easier to function.
Yeah, I mean it's so yeah. I have done a lot of work with Harebrained Schemes, but I'm still, freelance and I don't take on a lot of projects at the same time, or I haven't in the past. But right now we're working on 3 different projects at the same time. One of which is with Harebrained Schemes, and another one is with V1 Interactive, which is another local studio started by Marcus Leto, who's Bungie, was the Bungie. I think he was the creative director for the first several Halo iterations and ODST and Reach, I believe. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think that the relationship of a composer is mostly freelance, and it's it can be a good creative relationship because the composer really doesn't need to be there on a day-to-day basis for certain projects, and having this sort of creative distance. And a lot of us work in our studios separate from the studio, so we don't have the studio people see how the sausage is made per se, and don't have to see me in my sweats, screaming at my computer. I just get to show them the magic.
You guys compose at like 3 a.m. and they're all,
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good way to structure the relationship, I think, and it just allows a lot of freedom for us to be able to take on other projects and side gigs, and focus on the business side of being a composer, which is a big part of it.
So if I understand right, before you went back to school for composing, you were a sound engineer, a mixer?
No, before I went back to school, I basically was just a hobbyist production and musician. So I produced music did a lot of hip hop production, and was producing music in a group called Rudy and the Rhetoric, in a Seattle area group. Did a little bit of like touring, but really like small scale, kind of like that classic embarrassing story of that person in a band when they were younger that's trying to make something out of it, but always having a job on the side, and sort of keeping music relegated to the hobby side of things. And I just kind of got really sick and tired and burned out of always doing music after I got home from a day job, and was at a point in my life where I was like, if I don't try to do this full time, I'm never going to be able to get it off the ground. So, the music, the production part was always really fulfilling for me, but, doing concerts and touring and stuff was not fun. And so I'd always been obsessed with film and game scores, and really decided that if I was going to become successful in anything, it would be, in that sort of composer position. So that's really what I kind of went all in for, and got very lucky.
So what instruments do you play?
Well, I play a lot of instruments very poorly, but I grew up playing the drums, and I play a bit of piano, noodling here and there. It's the instrument that I'm usually writing on, and obviously there's my MIDI controller is just a giant keyboard. And then I did go back in part of my studies for school. I did classical guitar study as well, but I would, my nails are not long anymore, so I don't really play often. But I play a bit of this and that throughout the scores that I work on, but nothing virtuosic, nothing that would pass muster for any sort of musicianship.
That makes sense. But with drums, there's I can tell a lot when I talk to composers what instrument they bass in, because that's has an emphasis in their scores, and your scores have a steady beat, a type of rhythm to it that usually you can tell from a percussionist. My wife actually guessed that you were a percussionist when we were listening
oh, wow.
the other day, and so because there's one we were listening the other day, I'm like, well, that person clearly plays brass. And
right.
the way that the scores are set up, there's a certain emphasis on certain things that a percussionist would know that people who don't play percussion wouldn't necessarily know, especially even when it comes to samples. Like you can tell when it's percussionist with samples and when it's not, because samples can be hit or miss, and your samples sound like real instruments when it comes to percussion. So I was like, yep, that's a drum.
Yeah, I think that's a callback to my past in my garage, destroying my drum set, playing 4 or 5 hours a day, and then also going into when I first got my first sampler and my ASR 10, and I was making producing electronic music or hip hop music. A lot of that was me starting with the percussion as a framework for making some music. So I'm always a big fan of using interesting sounding percussion in my tracks.
And so one thing I want to talk about is influences. I was listening to Shadowrun Hong Kong, especially the track, I believe it's pronounced Yoi. It sounds to me that you have been influenced it's either an Asian cello sound, or you have a very influence from Jeremy Zuckerman's like Avatar Legend of Korra scores, because the cello kicks in and I instantly go back to the sound that he did for those fantastic animated shows, the soft Asian cello with the beat behind it. Were you influenced at all by what he did, or is it just a coincidence, or maybe it's just an Asian cello sound that I didn't grow up with?
Yeah, I know it's terrible for me to admit this, but I haven't actually heard those scores, which is awful. Yeah, I know, and embarrassing. But
it's a treat when you finally can.
I know. It's on the list. I've got a backlog like you wouldn't believe. Just like my video game backlog is ridiculous. But yeah, that's the erhu, and that's a really classic Chinese instrument, a bowed horsehair instrument, or I don't know if it's always has to be horsehair, but yeah, it's for that particular project we didn't have any live budget, so those are all samples, and I think at the time that was one of those sample libraries. It was the East-West sample library, and they have really interesting sort of modular performance patches on there where you can string together melodic sequences in what can sound like a fairly musical way. So I really enjoyed doing that, and then because it was set in Hong Kong, it just made a lot of sense that would be a great instrument to use. And listening back to that soundtrack. It feels like such a long time ago. In terms of just where I'm at now, and how important that score was to me at the time. It was really kind of the score that my first full score that I did completely alone. I actually did all the sound design for that as well, but we don't have to talk about that because I'm not a sound designer. But
we'll bring up some sound design questions, but that'll come up a little later. But that's fascinating. So, I guess I'm wrong with one influence, but so what composers would you say were influences to your particular sound?
Like at that time, I was really just influenced by. So I listened to a lot of Radiohead. I'm really a big fan of their progression as rock artists, and how they've kind of managed to stay relevant and whatnot. And then I just have a lot of love for electronic and hip hop beats. So I always like to say that I was influenced by people like Radiohead, people like Aphex Twin, to like MF Doom or Aesop Rock. It's pretty eclectic, and I didn't really look at Hong Kong through the lens of an influence as much as I just kind of like to mash all the things that sort of get the hair standing up on the back of my neck together in one. So that score was really a fun one in particular because it's cyberpunk, so it has you can get away with a lot. I mean, you can combine Western classical orchestrations or film score moments with backbeats or breakbeats or interesting electronic elements and whatnot. So I really just felt like I had free range to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, it definitely sounded like very much like your take on the type of score that you'd have in, say, like Deus Ex, like Human Revolution. I think it's Michael McCann did that one. The cyberpunk score, which I'm kind of excited to hear what we're going to get in actual Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah, me
too.
To
hear that, but the Deus Ex sound, but it's your own take on it because where that one he lends to certain type of instrumentals, and rising actions. Yours definitely is more of a pulse, which is important when it comes to those type of games, especially when action kicks in. You need the pulse, or else you might get distracted by the music. You just need the heart pumping beat.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, Deus Ex was definitely a good inspiration for that, to see how certain composers are exploring this realm. Also, I will say the score to Splinter Cell Chaos Theory was a really big one that I've always latched onto. It's Amon Tobin's score, which I think is still one of the most unique game scores out there. And I mean, the cyberpunk element of it really was allowed me to take a lot of authorship on how I wanted to approach it, and also Harebrained Schemes allowed me to do what I wanted with the score. There's a piece in there that I think the first piece that I gave them for the project really started out with like sort of a traditional, or not so traditional, but like a Western interpretation of traditional Chinese music and instrumentation with huge tangu drums and erhus and pipas and all that stuff. And then about 2 minutes into it, it kind of breaks into the main theme, which adds more electronic elements and sort of the portamento strings and whatnot on the erhu. And that was my first track to them, to show them that I wanted to ground it in the reality of the historical music of China, and then also bring it into this sort of melting pot future of what I imagined cyberpunk Hong Kong would be like.
I like it. And so when you come to this electronic sound, did you have you brought influence from, say, the ones that broke into, say, Hollywood sound, like I guess M83 and Trent Reznor and I guess Daft Punk? They broke it really big with Tron. any of those type of influences work your way into the music, or do you try to keep the bigger ones kind of sounds out since they are their own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really. So when I'm working on projects, especially, I rarely ever listen to music, which sounds odd. I feel like I'm listening to music all the time because I'm writing music all the time, and I don't really. When I set out to do a project, I actually really avoid. I try to avoid people sending me inspirational playlists, sort of thing. Like, this is the sound we're going for, kind of. And I think that like it can tend to lock your brain into this creative framework that feels like you kind of are either hitting or missing a mark as you're writing something. I'd much prefer to send somebody a track that I'm just that just comes to me, or that I'm writing and I think it sounds cool, and then get feedback that I'm either on the mark or off it, and then adjusting from there. But yeah, of course, Trent Reznor, huge influence. His approach to scores like The Social Network, and seeing, this is kind of why I love the Amon Tobin score for Chaos series, that I realized, at the time I didn't have formal training. I thought there was no possible way that I could or would even want to work with an orchestra. So I saw these scores and was thinking, I didn't realize that you could do these sort of electronic scores, and that was really what I was interested in. So that was the focus.
So you started off with Shadowrun, 2 different games in Shadowrun with different sounds, and then you jumped to Necropolis. How did you try to change your approach to composing when you went from the Shadowrun sound that you kind of been dug into for several years then into a totally different game with a different tone, much darker tone, actually more brutal? How did you adjust yourself mentally, having started off one way and then your next project was a very different look, feel, and type of game?
Yeah. Well, I really loved that. I felt like I had been, you work on a project for a few years and you get really locked into a sound. And when you're done, for me at least, the artist in you wants to wipe the slate clean and go try something new, or try something different, or build upon what you've done before, and not ever feel like you're sort of pigeonholing yourself into one certain style. So Necropolis was a lot of fun too, and it breaks my heart that game wasn't more successful, because I feel like it had so much potential, and I really enjoyed doing the score for that. But I was just having a lot of fun, breaking away from the Shadowrun sound, but still being able to use electronic elements in the score, and then also starting to incorporate more and more orchestral stuff and a little bit of aleatorics and whatnot. It was fun. It was one of those scores that was kind of like the game is not too self-serious. The game sort of has this tongue-in-cheek humor about it, and so it was nice to make a score that was had moments of like brutal kind of horror sounds, but then would give way into a little bit more lighthearted, or sort of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, because this score, you have, it's fairly heavy throughout. The game is fairly brutal throughout. And then you have like the last track in our Death with Friends, which is like, let's go for whimsy, let's have a party with bodies everywhere.
Yeah, that was we That was for I think it was for like the PAX announcement trailer. We did that that one, and they asked for something that was just completely, goofy and sort of catchy and whatnot. So that was a fun one to because I think I was just in the midst of writing, like you said, a pretty brutal, dark, kind of brooding, low winds doing strange extended techniques and stuff, and then all of a sudden I'm writing a kind of a dancey pop thing in the middle of it. It was pretty fun.
Like, I imagine that the switch was just like, did you have something in mind right away, or did you have to like turn off your brain and go, what would this sound like, and have to take several tries and try to create a sound for it? Or did you already have something ready to go, like mentally going, yep, that's what these guys would sound like if they were having fun?
I think we did a few iterations on that. I sent them one, and it wasn't quite what they were looking for. I think the first one I gave them was still had like this element of dread behind it, and they were like, nope, remove all the dread. We want completely happy. And so I pretty much tried to write the most annoying riff you could possibly think of, and repeated it the whole time, and it worked.
Do you get to name your music tracks? Because you have at least in Necropolis and so on, you have a very kind of like what I think it's Michael Giacchino does, where he has like the jokes in his names of the songs. Like a lot of these names, they seem to be very tongue in cheek with Alice in Wonderhell and Never Eat Rotten Meat and so on. Do you get to name them, or do they name them for you?
I do get to name the tracks, and I usually send them a list of track names, and if something is not what they think is appropriate for the soundtrack, like if it's giving up a spoiler, or
like Qui-Gon's Noble End and Phantom Menace.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, mostly it's they don't really get any feedback on the tracks, and I like to make them really specific to the game or project itself, so people who know what we're referring to.
And then from Necropolis, you got to jump into a series which we got one, and we're getting another one really soon. That has been too long dead. You got to jump into Battletech, which was a very big welcome return. Literally, I've done the show since 2011, and probably the first 6 years of it, we were like, what happened to Battletech? Where's more mech warrior? Where's Clan Ghost Bear? We need more of our mechs back. And then finally, the past couple of years, bam, we're getting Mech Warrior, and we got Battletech, and the series is back, hopefully permanently, or at least in a big way for now. How did you get involved in Battletech first? Because I know I've seen interviews with you where you talked about how you were a fan of Mech Warrior 2. For me, I think it was Mech Warrior 3 I was the biggest fan of. One of the Nova where you could jump around. Might have been 2. Kind of mix those ones up. But, like you met kind of Mech Warrior 2 playing it like a lot of us were back then. What brought you connected to Battletech in particular, this game, this return to form for the series?
Yeah, it's another one of those things that's really weird to think of, because when I was pretty young, I think, when MechWarrior 2 came out, and I played. I didn't have a computer that was good enough to play it at home, so I'd have to go to a friend's house or to my dad's work to play it, and I just remember just being obsessed and kind of I think I was too young or too disinterested to really understand how deep the Battletech universe was. So I never really got into beyond the combat and stomping mechs and explosive elements to it. So I never really understood, I think, how deep the Battletech universe was, and because of that, I never got into the tabletop.
Or the giant, massive book collections of like Michael Stackpole and someone wrote.
Yeah, I never read the books. I did go to the Battletech centers as a kid too, and was obsessed with those, which is odd to think of, because thinking that someday I would be scoring the Battletech Return with Jordan Weissman, who probably was I probably was in the same room with him at some point as a kid if he was in one of the local Battletech centers, which I'm sure he was from time to time. And so it's one of those moments that was very bizarre, very surreal, and it also allowed me to dig deeper into the Battletech world and realize how really cool it was. Like, complex, high science fiction stuff that I would be really interested now in if it were a movie or a TV series or something. It kind of reminded me of or I guess not the lore itself, but the way that the Expanse series of books approaches.
Yes.
Yeah, and then of course things like Firefly have always been inspirational for me, and so there was this combination of reconnecting with this IP that I loved as a kid but didn't know how complex it was, how deep it was, and then also the element of the game that brought together so much of what I love about science fiction, which is the mercenary campaign and operating a ship and managing the ship and banding together with people and creating bonds with crewmates and whatnot. So it was just like this really perfect combination of all these things that have been part of my life. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things where, Shadowrun Hong Kong was a pretty good success critically. The score was well received, and yeah, I just always have been creating a good relationship with Harebrained Schemes. So they just were gracious enough to ask me back to do Battletech, and it was a thrill.
I know they're not necessarily, well, they're the same world, but not necessarily the same series. Do you have any association or contact with, I think it's Sean Colton who's doing the score for MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries? It comes out in September. Wow, that's really soon.
Yeah, that is.
Any
no, I
connection
don't.
or contact with them at all?
No, I haven't talked with them at all. I was in contact with their team a while back, I think, just to chat about possibilities and whatnot. And they've been in development for quite some time, and obviously Battletech had a lot of overlap with that too. So.
Yeah, well, that means you get to play that game whenever you get it on your backlog.
Yeah.
Play a new MechWarrior game without having to be like, oh, I hear my sound. Oh, I don't want to judge myself as I play it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Battletech, though, I will say, listening to your score, the first time I heard it, I have to admit, I was expecting the first time I pressed play to be like, this is going to be like Dejwandi's score for Pacific Rim. It's going to be big, loud, full of guitars, and it's going to amp me up. And instead, I got something more akin to like a Mass Effect score, which is good. I've interviewed all of those people, and it took me a while to like shift my brain. So I was just wondering, what inspired your tone for that game? Because when it comes to big mechs and robot franchises, they're either big and loud, like Transformers with I forgot who does the score for the Transformers one, the guy who does it with all micro-based stuff. But it's either big and loud and full of like inspiring brass or guitars like Pacific Rim, or it's a softer tone, more of like the human side of humanity versus robot type things. What inspired your softer tone for Battletech versus the big loud bombast that we've gotten for a decade now?
Yeah. So that was, it's kind of similar to how I approached Shadowrun in terms of the first meeting that I had with the team. I told them what I didn't want to do first. So for Shadowrun, it was, I don't want to make a game that sounds like it was made in the 90s, right? I don't want to make a cyberpunk sounding game. I don't want to make it referential or too overly fan servicey to kind of stroke people's idea of what Shadowrun was to them when they were younger. And the same thing with Battletech. Since I felt I would be doing a disservice if I tried to step back and look at old approaches to Battletech old scores, which are great scores and are appropriate for the games that they're in. If I tried to recreate those, it would be disingenuous from me. And I think the element of Battletech that was so unique to me was that really what Battletech is, this game, is it's a war story. So it's a story about the corruption of power, and it's essentially, it's kind of that Game of Thrones in space, space feudalism story. It's about loss and redemption and the struggles of these characters and the main character Kamea in general, about her lust and desire to become ruler of this periphery. And I felt that my best job as a composer in general and specifically for this project is to treat the characters with a whole lot of empathy and use the story as the starting point and then move back from there. And other elements can have moments of, gigantic walls of synths and huge drums, but ultimately I wanted to tell the war story and the power struggle story that makes the game, I think, so unique.
So rather than focus on, say, the mech action elements and the war, like the explosion side, you're focusing more on the people inside the suits and their emotions and what's going on around them. So musically we kind of get what's inside their head versus the giant war that's going on around them.
Exactly,
like
yeah. And
more personal touch.
my favorite part of the game is that you can go out to these battles or these missions, and everything is such high stakes. You never come back from a mission fully intact. You've always lost something, whether it's somebody's gotten injured or your mech has been damaged. And then the moment when you step back on your ship, it's always the people. You're there with the people. You're assessing the damage. You're talking to people. You're dealing with the loss of crewmates, and looking at your bank account and seeing that if you don't do 2 more missions this month, the bank is going to take away your ship, right? So it's an interesting combination because the combat is thrilling and it's supposed to sound thrilling, but that fades away when you get back on the ship, and really you're just left with a can floating in space struggling to eke out a living. And I felt like that was the emotional resonance that I wanted to latch onto. And I think if I went too much on the tone of this is awesome, this is wow, it would be a disservice to the story.
I agree. And one song that really kind of indicates this is how the soundtrack starts. The theme for All Mankind. It starts small, builds to something larger, and more complex, and then gets softer as it kind of focuses on different aspects. With this song, there's an instrument that we were trying to identify. Do you have a clavichord playing in that?
you were talking about at the beginning?
Yeah, it's either we were like it's not a harpsichord. It sounds like a clavichord, but I haven't really heard that in a game soundtrack very much.
Yeah, so that's actually was written to be a cimbalom, but it's played. It's not written idiomatically. So really, we just decided to. It's essentially just dulcimer, a few dulcimer samples that are layered on top of each other.
Oh, we were both wrong. Okay. We like trying to figure out what instruments are. And there was one instrument my wife was trying to figure out what it is. And then looking up on your website, the reason why she couldn't figure out what it is because it's not an instrument that exists. It's your Frankenstring thing.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain the Frankenstring?
Yeah, so this is kind of going, building on the previous thing we were talking about. So Battletech, I think a lot of people have heard say this is a game of attrition. So like you're going out into these battles or combat moments, and you're being slowly worn down each time, and you're always making do with what's around you, whether it's repurposing things to rebuild a mech, or you're swapping out pilots because somebody's injured, and somebody who has a specialty in a certain area may not be best suited for this certain mech, but you have to make do with what you have in order to keep the money flowing in and being able to keep these jobs going. And so, we have a pretty good budget for the game. We recorded with full orchestra in Budapest and Germany, and did choir in Latvia. But for the length of this game is really designed to be played for an infinite amount of time. I wanted to try to make that score go as far as possible, and I think one of the tricks to do that is to record soloists and do some recording yourself. And for this particular project, because of the nature of the game that you're making do with what's around you, I thought, hey, why don't I just try to make a noise machine, something that I can bow and hit and put a magnetic resonator on it and see what weird sounds I can get, because this game is about making do with scrap. And I just thought that it would add this element, this spice of realism and grittiness to it. So I usually started every track with an ambient section that had parts of this Frankenstring in it, whether it's me creating a percussion instrument by layering a whole bunch of different hits on top of each other, or bowing the strings that are on there, the guitar pickups and whatnot that I attach there, or detuning the violin as I bow it. And there's even like a street sign that I attached to it and turned it into sort of a playable saw for certain things. And of course you can process that through the modular synths and stuff that I have around the studio and really create something that is unique, but it still carries that weight and air of something that is at least from a real source, which I think can help elevate scores.
So one question I have, you said you recorded in Budapest and in Germany, which I find kind of fascinating because most composers I've talked to record in like Nashville.
Yeah.
Is Budapest in Germany because of, what is it, Paradox? I think Paradox is in Sweden, right? Is it because of the publisher, or did they just decide you're going to Europe to record? The location seemed to be an awesome place to record. One looked like it was inside a church or something. But why go to Europe to record the music?
Yeah, it's all about budget. So Nashville is amazing, and of course Hollywood is amazing as well. And that's sort of the tiers of cost. Hollywood is usually the most expensive. LA is the most expensive, and then several different other options in the U.S. There's great places to record in Seattle. Bastyr Chapel here in Seattle is probably one of the best places to record choir, period, for movies and games. And then Nashville is a great, amazing place to record. We're probably going to be recording there later this year for the project I'm on, the V1 Interactive project. And then Budapest is also amazing. The players there are very, very great, but they're a lot cheaper. And you can do smaller or you can do more minutes for less in Budapest. So really wanted to stretch that budget as far as we could.
Okay. I was curious because I know they film a lot. The films go to Europe a lot. They want to do it on the cheap. But I never thought of why they'd go there. But I guess that one cost save is they just have to fly you and a couple other people. They don't have to fly an orchestra around, or they don't have to do that. They're there, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
You did not conduct the orchestra, did you? I didn't notice you in the videos conducting it.
No, for Battletech, I don't think I did. No, I may have done one or two, but mostly no. I am, the nature of my training is not in conducting. I mean, I can get up there and conduct a piece, but it's much better. My ears are much better served being in the engineering room at this point. I mean, I imagine there's some cases, especially if it's a particularly emotive piece that I'm trying to convey something very specific. But mostly all that, for the types of scores we're doing can be done on the paper, and then the conductor, who is a professional, can handle the conducting side. So we had Peter Pejcik in Budapest, amazing conductor and amazing composer and musician himself, and he just has such a great command of the orchestra and really understands a piece of music and what we're trying to do with it. So he was great.
Just wait till Video Games Live decides to use your music and bring you out to one of their concerts so you can conduct yourself.
I'm in.
They do that. I think the last time I saw them was in Utah, so I think they brought in Chance Thomas to conduct because that's where he's from.
Mm-hmm.
Someday, probably sooner than later, the way that tour goes. So I know Battletech added DLC with Flashpoint and so on. Do you get to do more music when they do the DLC, or do they kind of have you mix music around to use for it?
Yeah, so Flashpoint in particular didn't have any extra music, but the most recent one that released a few weeks ago, the Urban Warfare, I was able to do about I think 15-20 minutes more of music there. So that Urban Warfare is the introduction of these big cities that you get to travel to. So slowly the map is opening up, and you're allowed to travel to these different places. And that was a really kind of unique experience for me because so much of the original game is this, you're in the periphery, which is this frontier part of the galaxy. It's kind of a lot of uninhabited places, a lot of places that are just for mining and people eking out a living there. And we never really went to a giant city. And so going to these huge urban environments was my chance to amp it up a little bit and sort of forget about that feudalism war story and bring out the more of the heavy guns.
Yeah, it definitely has a very a more urban sound to it, which I like. You can tell the difference in what you're doing with where you are with your music, and that's that shows a lot of skill. I like it. One thing I know, having followed you on social media for a while, that you were definitely surprised about is all the award notice that your score got for this. You got nominated for scores including Best Video Game Score of the Year, where you were up against, Bear McCreary, who I have to admit I've listened to his new Godzilla score way more times than I will ever admit on air.
He's a total hack, right? Gosh.
that's a nice heavy. Well, I guess Godzilla needs a heavy score, but with God of War, I think you went against the Destiny 2, Torn, and Celeste. Was that the other one?
Yeah.
Did anyone give you any forewarning that people were recognizing your score, or did it all come out of the blue and you were caught completely off guard?
It definitely comes out of the blue. I mean, I get positive, feedback from the team, but that tends to not really be absorbed by me. It's hard to tell, right? You're working on a project for so long. You enjoy what you're doing. You enjoy the music, but then you kind of lose objectivity. So it's really cool, to get feedback from people and critics and be nominated for and win awards is always nice. But that ASCAP award in particular it just kind of blew me away, because for one thing, there was no process of applying for it or submitting for it or doing a PR push for it or anything like that. They
just really pick you out.
Yeah, it's just like the group, it's chosen by members of ASCAP and nominating composers, and being there with in sort of the same breath as people like Bear McCreary, who I just really look up to and love his career. I thought God of War was one of the most brilliant game soundtracks that I can remember. And then Gary Scheinman is another person that I've just always admired and looked up to as a composer. Sky Lewin, and who's a friend who also lives in Seattle, and Salvatore, who are amazing composers and just great people for Destiny 2, and then Lena's score for Celeste was just absolutely stunning to me. It was amazing. It was surreal. And there's kind of that Wayne's World, I'm not worthy moment, as you look around and see all these talented people around you. But yeah, it's awesome.
I imagine another thing, did you already know a lot of these composers or people that you got to mingle with these different awards beforehand, or did it end up being like you could meet all these people for the very first time that you never thought you'd be meeting out, on an equal level with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people there. Like, I'd never met Bear before. I never thought I would have a chance. We've been, in same events and stuff, but I'm a little too bashful to come up and speak my mind. But yeah, I know Lena is in Seattle, so we've been sort of Twitter friends for a while. And then Sky, I know from Seattle also, and Mike Salvatore. And then Gary, I was lucky enough to get to sit in on a scoring session with Gary for his Shadow of Mordor score, which was really awesome. That was recorded here. A lot of it was recorded here at Bastyr, and seeing him work and stuff was really cool for me. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that you do know, but then in this ASCAP award, you're also in the same room with people like Giacchino and John Powell and Britell, and people that I really admire, and Pinar Toprak was there, and just really cool. It was cool to be in the room.
Aren't they the ones that select the nominees? It's like it's the composers. That's basically an organization of just composers. So they're the ones that literally noticed your work.
I guess so. Yeah, I think that it's chosen by members, and it might even be a committee of people who have voting. I'm not 100% sure, but
just be like, John Williams picked my work. Just keep that in.
Yeah, let's just say that John Williams himself picked it up, and then John Powell did it. At the same time.
So we're almost out of time, so just gonna wrap up with a few more questions. One being with this type of project, did you get to, other than your Frankenstring, did you get to work with any instruments or sneak any instruments in there that you'd always wanted to work in there that you got to stick into a score? Like I've heard people talk about, I just forgot what the name of the instrument was. How embarrassing. The Asian one that has like no string that can make all those weird noise. The theremin, sneaking theremins in there, and taiko drums and stuff. Did you get to play with any instruments that you never thought you'd be able to work in that you're like, I'm putting it in because I want to?
For me, the Battletech score was it was like the whole orchestra thing was so new to me. I studied, obviously in school for doing this sort of thing, but it was really my first full score done with orchestra. So working with any live instruments was just super thrilling to me. We had a solo cellist, Erika Kadi, who's from Budapest, who is all over the Battletech score, which was just awesome to have a live cellist there. And then being able to mix these live strings with my modular synths was very satisfying for me. I always love to combine either analog or software synths with live stuff. And so it was just all super thrilling.
So being a independent composer, I know from interviewing other ones that sometimes if a project gets really big, they'll invite people in to help finish tracks or write certain sections. Have you ever been invited in by other composers as of yet to help work on a project where you just do a little bit of music to help them out because they have too much music to do within the time crunch?
Yeah, I would luckily this year Will Roger, who's one of my favorite composers.
Yeah, I love Roger. He just did Call of Duty. Well, I actually interviewed him last year with World at War. He's awesome.
Yeah, he's a super awesome person. He's also a Seattle composer, and he is in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, writers, composers, I think, working today in film or games, in my opinion. And he asked me to design a few sort of modular synth patches for him for Mortal Kombat, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
Pretty cool. It didn't do a lot. I only did, I gave him a few minutes worth of stuff. But it was, I was in the credits for Mortal Kombat, which is another game that I vividly remember as a kid walking into my local record store and them having the Mortal Kombat arcade unit there, and my mom telling me I wasn't allowed to play it because it was too violent, but I would do it anyways.
Sega do what Nintendo.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about Mortal Kombat because you're credited for sound design, and I was like, did you create some of the gory noises when people get decapitated? That must be awesome sound design to do.
Yeah. For that one in particular, there was a moment in the game. The game was, so Will did all the music for the cinematics and the main theme for that game, and he showed me some of the in progress work when he signed me on, and they did such a cool job of these cinematics. Like, they are so, it's like you're watching an action movie or a 90s classic 90s action movie or something. It's just, I was blown away by how well done they were. And also Will's score is perfect for it. It's written in the perfect style for what they're doing there. But yeah, for the particular scene that I did synth design for was this may be a spoiler alert, but there was some moment where time starts to reverse, and so I ended up recording some. I have a little crappy violin here. I recorded some bowing of violin and fed it through my modular synth, particularly through a module that I have here called, what is it called? Oh, the Morphogene. And then also through another module called the Magneto, and did some reversing effects and some synth drops and stuff with it. And so it was really cool.
So, last two questions. One is, people are going to be looking at your work in the future, especially since Battletech just got a lot of praise. We know you're working on that V1 interactive game, which people notice that still because it's made by Halo people, and people are really paying attention to that now. Is there anything else you can promote that you're working on, or look forward at certain time frames for things that you're working on? 'Cause I know you can't talk about a lot of it because NDAs, but is there anything you can promote right now?
So yeah, I'm working on some stuff that's very, very, very exciting, and I won't be able to talk about it today, but I definitely can't wait to. So I'll be able to talk about that hopefully in the near future.
Awesome.
I think one of the main things is we finally got the Battletech soundtrack on vinyl, and that's being produced by Black Screen Records, and it looks great. We got artwork from Joel Ducoup, who he still is working for Harebrained Schemes, but he was the lead concept artist for Battletech. And so those are up for pre-order now. You can get those at blackscreenrecords.com. And if you want a signed one, I've got some left there on my Bandcamp, which is joneverist.bandcamp.com.
And if people want to ask you more questions directly, social media, where you recommend people go?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter at it's just at Jon Everist. It's JONEVERIST. And you can also hit me up on Facebook and Instagram also, but probably Twitter is the best.
And your official website?
Website is www.joneverist.com or www.everestsound.com.